Before going on the air, Joan and Richard and I were reminiscing about old times and realized we've known each other for 21 years. A great deal has happened to all three of us since then. Here we are in New York, 3,000 miles away from where we met, and a great deal certainly has happened to the careers of Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonynge. Of course, in those good old days in London when we first met and Joan was working with Richard towards her debut at Covent Garden, the repertoire was a little different from nowadays. Both comic and tragic was very different. Joan, let's go over some of those early roles. And in your Covent Garden debut was in '52, wasn't it, Joan?
That's right, yes.
As the First
Lady. It was
Lady.
the First Lady in the Magic Flute, and I think I followed it up pretty quickly with the High Priestess in Aida and Clotilde, and also my big chance, to sing Amelia in Masked Ball when every other European soprano seemed to have succumbed to the Christmas cheer. And after Christmas weekend, I was pushed on, quaking at the knees, because I really didn't know what I was about.
A great many people thought in those days that you sang, your way of singing reminded them very much of Elizabeth Redberg. I remember you as Amelia in Aida, Amelia in Ballo and Aida, and Pamina in the Magic Flute too.
Well, Pamina came
later.
A bit late.
Right.
Yes.
And she sang all the parts in Magic Flute. She sang First Lady first, and then she sang Pamina, then she sang Queen of the Night.
Oh, well, the Queen of the Night is one of the roles I really didn't enjoy that much because I found her so cardboard. She didn't get anywhere. You know? She just came on,
on the moon all night.
I sort of, one was sort of appeared and was stuck there. You just couldn't move and did your piece and then disappeared and then appeared again. It was horrible.
Another one of the roles that got you comparisons with Redberg was Agatha in Freischütz, of course.
Well, of course, I love Freischütz. I enjoyed that very much. It was rather funny. It was a hoot, actually, because it was a terrible English translation. And
don't shoot Max, I am the dove.
And,
that's exactly what she says in German. Don't shoot Max, I am the dove.
Yes, but both sopranos were so
everyone
sort of
understands
large,
it in
English. It
English.
was a terrible ramp to come down, and we both waddled down it rather fearfully, I'm afraid.
And of course there was Michaela and Carmen. I remember that was in English too.
Well, she sang first of all 40 before more performances of Frasquita before she got to Michaela.
Before I ever was allowed to sing Michaela.
And
then when I got to Michaela, I was pregnant anyway.
As a matter of fact, just last week I was telling one of my prima donnas that I was singing her first Carmen that I had heard Joan Sutherland sing the gypsy song, Les Trangles des Sistres. And she said, how is that? She never sang Carmen? And I said, but she sang Frasquita. And in the Covent Garden production, Frasquita sang the first verse. She right. And Michaela, I remember one occasion where in the English translation with the spoken dialogue, the tenor with a distinct Irish accent, as you walked on, said, Michaela, me darling, what are you doing in Seville? In Brazil.
Brazil, darling, Brazil.
Which broke the audience up completely.
Not to mention the singers on stage.
Oh, yes. So we had some funny times there, I tell you.
And you also did something very, very far out when you sang Branghena on one occasion, I believe.
Oh, well, that, of course, was not at Covent Garden. That was in a concert with Sir John Barbaroli. That was in Manchester.
In English or in German?
German.
Marvelous. What a shame we don't have a tape of that. And you did some other operas at that time which were either not in Covent Garden or some not on the stage. For instance, I remember your Constanza in Führung on the radio and Oriente.
Oriente, she did complete.
Oriente complete.
She did Madame Butterfly on the radio. She did
I
Bohème on
did
the
a great
radio.
deal for the BBC. You know, I think maybe I got my Covent Garden contract because they heard me on the BBC.
So really, radio in England was your start before you even went into opera.
Well, I did a lot of the way out things on radio, which rather upset, I think, Covent Garden's plans. They couldn't quite equate with the sort of work I was being given to do at Covent Garden and the sort of work that I chose to do for the BBC, and in fact, which the BBC ultimately began to ask me to do. And
what was the very first Donizetti music you ever performed?
The first she performed.
Was it Amelia de Liverpool?
The first full opera was Amelia de Liverpool, yes. Which is not a gag, it's really an opera.
No, as a matter of fact, there are, I think, some tapes floating around of that
yes.
one. I remember Amelia de Liverpool, and that must be the wildest introduction to Donizetti of anybody these days. I mean, who else has started Donizetti with Amelia de Liverpool? Maybe that meant something. One sort of memory of the good old days in London when all of us were starting our way up the ladder in one direction or another. I remember meeting you both on a street corner when you were working on Donna Anna, just before your first visit to the Brave New World. And it seemed to me that there was some friction about what kind of repertoire, what direction your career should take as far as repertoire is concerned. How did you get from Amelia in Ballo in Maschera to Gilda, Lucia, and Olympia and the Tales of Hoffmann?
By pestering everybody to death till they gave it to us to shut us up.
Well, that system has worked before.
Well, I was a little bit difficult at first because I didn't believe that my voice was capable of singing these roles. I'd regarded some of them as rather, well, really for a bird-like soprano that I didn't fancy myself as becoming, or I certainly couldn't see myself as singing. Right. For instance, the roles of Gallicorci, who was such a petite person, whereas I know I could give her at least 15. I suppose I was 15 inches taller than her, really.
Oh, come.
I must have been.
She wasn't that short and you're not that
But,
tall.
well, you have your picture taken together.
And,
she was a great fan of yours in those
roles,
roles,
to think
Joan.
about playing roles like
8 or 9 inches.
I felt a little bit. I felt awkward about the actual visual thing. Never mind about the vocal thing either. Richard eventually got me convinced about the vocal thing, and then, of course, we had, as he said, to convince the theatre.
Yes. The Covent Garden wanted to groom her to become their top dramatic Wagnerian soprano. When they engaged her, they wanted her to become more or less the understudy for Sylvia Fisher, who was then the very great dramatic soprano at Covent Garden. She was a wonderful singer.
I remember her.
I even started to cover the Marschallin.
That was your first assignment at Covent Garden, was to understudy the Marschallin.
Isn't that it? That I never knew. In all these years I never heard that.
They wanted her to sing Chrysothemis, and we fought that very much because we did not want her to sing Chrysothemis, because we thought for a young singer it's a dangerous part, which of course it is.
Yes.
And so we had a row, and she was nearly chucked out of Covent Garden because she refused that. She refused also quite a few things at that time. She refused to sing Glinda very early on because she didn't want to sing it. She did eventually sing Eva, which of course is not such a heavy part. And now, of course, she sings parts that are much heavier than many of those parts. But it was a matter of the time then, and the sort of timing, the sort of things we wanted to do. We of course, were passionate for her to get into the bel canto repertoire and to sing that. She sang a lot of it on the radio from as early on as 1952, I suppose.
Oh, I remember going on to stage.
She studied, I mean, when she first sang the audition at Covent Garden, the first audition at Covent Garden, she sang Victoria Halle from Tannhäuser and the Mad Scene from Puritani in the same audition.
I had no idea.
You see, there was no wonder that Covent Garden were confused.
And then we threw in Marriage of Figaro and Donna Anna as well, didn't we?
Well, it was confusing because this has always been a huge voice, very capable of singing Wagner. She sang the Liebestod in concert with orchestra in Sydney. She sang many of the bridal duets from Lohengrin, all sorts of Wagner. Yeah. And it was natural that they wanted to push her in that. I suppose because I was, in those days, rather anti-Wagner, didn't like it very much. Now I like it much more, but that's nothing to do with it. I didn't want to sing Wagner. I could hear all sorts of other things in her voice. I could hear her singing all sorts of fantastic music that she'd never thought about.
The diamonds, if you got them, you wear them.
Right, exactly.
But in those days, she was terrified of top C. She was terrified of singing.
You were worried about the top voice. You didn't think you could sort of encompass that kind of delicacy in the top voice and the kind of
I really didn't think I had it because I haven't perfect pitch, and my mother was a mezzo-soprano. I copied what she did, and when I got into the range of the top of her voice, I just stopped singing. I didn't try to sing any higher. Right. And maybe it was a blessing in disguise because I never used the top of the voice. Well, not maybe, it certainly was a blessing in disguise.
And you really tricked Joan into exploiting that, or at least opening up that part of her voice, didn't you, Rick?
In listening to her sing, or in listening to anybody sing, I mean, if you're very used to voices, you can hear, or I don't know, I imagine I can always hear what their voice will go to, the extension of the voice. And to me, when she sang a B flat or a B natural, it sounded like the middle of the voice. And I thought, well, if you can sing a note that sounds in such an incredibly easy position there, obviously you can sing a D flat or a D natural. Well,
He found out I could sing an F sharp.
One played scales. The day that she sang a sustained F sharp in out, a really long sustained F sharp, that was it. Well, I mean, once I'd heard her, I didn't want to hear it again because, you know, that's a long way up for a large voice. But she had it, and it's always been very easy. And she's, I mean, it's to do with the vocal cords. Right. I mean, you've either got it or you haven't got it.
Of course.
You have to be convinced that you've got it and learn how to produce it.
It's funny that, in a way, of course, everybody, the theater management, and even to a degree the public, was slow in recognizing this.
The Olympia, that's another story, because in order to shut us up, I think they gave her Olympia to sing at Covent Garden in the same week that she had a performance of Aida. And they gave her Aida on Monday and Olympia on Wednesday, and I'm sure they thought that she was going to fall on her face. She got the biggest ovation of her career to date singing Olympia, and of course that turned the tide for us.
I remember. That's fantastic. Now, of course, you do all 3 roles in the Tales of Hoffmann. Which is your favorite?
All 4 roles, if you don't mind.
Oh, excuse me, all 4 roles. Which is your favorite, Joan?
Oh, I think probably Antonia has
it is the most sympathetic.
It's the most sympathetic. There you are, Terry. It's
right.
the most sympathetic.
It's the best role.
The doll is a cardboard sort of character.
Oh, but she's fun.
But it's fun. And you obviously have a ball doing it. I mean,
I enjoyed it. It was marvelous to do it again in Seattle after so many years.
Do you find, for instance, at the end of a performance of The Daughter of the Regiment, where obviously you've had a great time, I mean, I think one of the successes of The Daughter of the Regiment, one of the reasons for its enormous success here at the Met, has been that it's so obvious that you, as well as the rest of the cast, that everybody's having such a wonderful time on stage, and it's very infectious. Do you find that, for instance, you're less tired at the end of a comic performance like that than you would be of the same amount of singing in a tragic role, let's say?
Well, the Daughter of the Regiment's quite a short opera, really. You can't compare it in length to Norma. And I think I can safely say I would be more tired after a performance of Norma than the Daughter of the Regiment, quite apart from anything else. Again, there's the weight of the costumes in Norma is tremendous. But there's quite a bit of action in The Daughter of the Regiment, and it's a constant change, whereas Norma or Traviata has a definite trend insofar as it is usually to a deathbed.
Right.
The Daughter of the Regiment is changing constantly from a rather sympathetic aria to a send-up,
right.
And this is something that one really has to feel and juggle also. It's not an untiring role, no.
Is it a whole different thing in the pit, Maestro? I mean, you have to watch what's going on stage much more in the way of extra gags and timing.
One has to watch. One has to be very careful, especially when they start playing up on stage. One has to stay awake. It's also very different because this is comic Donizetti, and it's a French Donizetti. It was written for the Opéra Comique in Paris, and he was very well. Offenbach reeks of Fille de Régiment.
I mean it that way, but I mean it's.
But Donizetti obviously knew very much the models of the operas of Boieldieu and Aubert, and he based his opera on this sort of writing, which it's much different to the tragic operas. And then, of course, as we've just said, Offenbach in his turn based his whole conception on this Donizetti work. Offenbach was first cellist in the orchestra on the opening night of Fille de Régiment at the Opéra Comique.
That I certainly never knew. It bowled me over the first time I heard The Daughter of the Regiment that everything in Offenbach seems to come from there, more or less. Not to knock Offenbach, because we all love him very much.
Great composer, Offenbach.
Let's talk about some of the things that have happened since the Met debut, for instance. Some of those exciting roles that you've undertaken, new operas that have arrived in the repertoire since then.
Well, there have been so many exciting ones. Puritani and Semiramide and Norma.
Huguenots.
And Les Huguenots and Alcina, Julius Caesar, Lacme.
Maria
Stuarda.
Maria Stuarda, which we love.
Maria Stuarda brings me to, of course, the composer of today's opera, Donizetti, and this seems to have been a banner year for Donizetti and the Bonynges, with 2 new Donizetti operas for America, and 1 new to you, Maria Stuarda, and now The Daughter of the Regiment at the Met. How do you feel about these 2 operas, Joan?
Well, the more I sing the music of Donizetti, the more intrigued I am by it, because having started with Lucia and then just at the beginning of last year done another complete production of it in Hamburg, in fact gone back to it completely fresh, it was intriguing to compare not only the daughter and Stuart, but also Lucia again. And I just find them fascinating and exciting in the extreme.
Donizetti was a very theatrical composser. He understood
was so
the theatre more than
so
most
dramatic.
composers. Elizabeth, of course, is made into an old witch, and
this also makes true in any case.
Yes, this also makes a great contrast in the opera.
Right, but do you feel, Joan, that perhaps you had a very deep conviction about the part of Mary Stuart because you were able to identify with her very much? I mean, your Scottish background, and obviously since your childhood, you must have known about Mary Stuart.
Oh, I think I did perhaps tend to identify. I identify far more with Mary Stuart than I do with Elizabeth. I cannot conceive of playing Elizabeth myself. I can't sort of feel.
I see.
That I have exactly the trends of Elizabeth, whereas Mary Stuart, I can understand.
Well, that brings up a point which actually I hadn't thought of before. You basically, I think, are an interpreter of sympathetic women. Norma, for instance, has been performed as a monster, as a sort of monstre sacré.
Oh, I can't see that.
But your Norma's a very moving woman. Yes, right.
Well, I'm going to play Lucrezia Borgia later on in the year, another Donizetti.
How do you turn her into a sweet girl?
She's redeemed by mother love, you see.
Well, then that means that you've got 3 Donizetti highlights in 1971. The Lucrezia Borgia is in 1971.
Yes, it's in...
This is 72, darling. I
November.
For you.
What am I doing? Yeah, right, of course.
This year is Lucrezia Borgia.
In Vancouver, I think, is the first
performance.
Yes. I see.
We do a lot of performances of it. We're looking forward to that very much.
As a matter of fact, while we're on the subject of Donizetti, you talked before about taking a fresh look at Lucia this past year in Hamburg. And I'd like to know really what characteristics Donizetti has for the voice that make him special to a singer. I mean, for instance, Rick, I've always been interested in the fact that Donizetti heroines were created by ladies of such different vocal character. Obviously, Persiani had a high, brightish sound, and yet Madame Unger, who also created the Donizetti roles, sang the mezzo-soprano in the first performance of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. So he must have written for ladies of very different vocal colors, really. But it all seems to be
the composers of those days, they understood the voice and they wrote the roles for the people that they were writing for. And this is the reason that you get some roles which are extremely difficult to sing these days, because
they had specific people in mind.
I mean, for example, Massenet wrote the role of Esclarmonde for Sybil Sanderson, the famous American coloratura soprano, and she had an enormously high voice which went up to a G comfortably. Well, he wrote the note into the opera for her. Well, who can sing that today? Very, very few people. Yes. And if they can sing the G, they can't sing the rest of the role.
Right. But Donizetti, for instance, seems to write much of the music rather low.
It is very much.
He writes very comfortably. He writes in the middle of the voice, because all vocal technique should be based on the middle of the voice. So many composers strain the tessitura of the voice, but Donizetti never does. He writes difficult music, of course, but he doesn't strain the voice if you know how to sing.
When listening to the Darder Regiment, for instance, I get the feeling that the tessitura is, let's say, higher than Lucia, basically.
Well, he wrote it for Paris.
It's brighter. Maybe it's because the French produces a brighter sound. I don't know. What
There's something in there, but it's not much higher. There's quite a lowish portion to it.
Because I'm always shocked.
For instance, is not high at all.
No, that's true. By this, I'm shocked by the center section of the mad scene from Lucia, from Alfin Zontua, which is terribly low.
Extremely low.
And many sopranos, or some sopranos, have sung it transposed up.
A lot of Pasquales, a lot of Elisir is very low.
Yes. And you just think that the ladies that those parts were written for perhaps had longer extension of voices than many singers of today. Do you think that would explain it? I mean, how otherwise do you...
Well, the pitch was a little lower in those days to start with.
Yes, of course.
So, in actual fact, I think this
maybe they sing perhaps more performances in a shorter space of time, and maybe they it was less wearing on their voices, perhaps, to have it in a certain, like, nice compact area of the voice, and any interpolations they did at will,
of course,
depending on how they felt on that particular night.
How much decorating, Rick, do you both include in Daughter of the Regiment? Is there a great deal of vocal decoration?
There's some in the reprise of Salut à la France. Of course, there's decoration. One doesn't need to do an enormous amount because Donizetti's already written a lot in there.
Right.
Once you get as far in the century as Donizetti and Verdi, you don't need to decorate a great deal because most of the decorations are written out. It's not like Rossini, who wrote the caballettas out twice exactly the same. There you must decorate.
Of course.
In Donizetti, yes, there's room for some decoration, but you don't have to do a lot.
On these two television shows that are going to be seen very soon in America, and which I saw a preview of recently, you bowled over the audience watching the preview, particularly as Rosina in the Barber of Seville, because we'd never seen or heard you in the part before.
And nobody thought of her in the part before, I dare say.
And it was, I mean, you were absolutely Rosina. And what was marvelous is that you talk a lot in the show with these marvelous puppet characters. And you stayed Rosina during that whole time.
Really?
I found it so.
I found the talking bit very hard to do.
But it was great fun because it allows, in a show which is condensed into a very short time, it allows one to take the music in whatever context one wants, and one can go from one piece to another very easy because of this interchange of talking that she has with the puppets, and they were charming puppets too.
Well, that's what I found, that it made the whole thing more immediate and more human because you were talking about the part and singing it at the same time.
It was very funny while we were doing the shows because Joan obviously adored the puppets, and she would talk to them all the time, whether she was supposed to or not, you know, and they would sort of talk in character. It was very amusing.
Well, we had some marvellous things that never got onto the film. It was such fun.
Oh, really? That's always the way. I hope we're going to see more of those. And
well, that's entirely up to the sponsor and the audience reaction, I think. I mean,
and do you think, for instance, that Rosina in the theatre might come out of the fact that you enjoyed doing
Terry,
it on
I don't know. You know, I always think of it as a mezzo role. You know, and I feel so I'm encroaching.
That doesn't sound like a mezzo role when you sing it, my dear.
Sorry,
How about future plans?
I think she must do Rosina one day. Yeah. What are we doing? Well, we're doing the Borgia, and of course we're doing lots of performances of tales of Hoffmann. We want to do some matinee operas.
A few recordings this summer. Should we spill the beans about a wild left field one, Joan?
Oh, I don't know, Terry. I think a few people have heard about that already.
The word is getting around that Joan Sutherland will record the title role in Turandot this summer, which will be a completely new experience for both Joan Sutherland and Joan Sutherland fans. And I think lots of us will very much look forward to that. And then, of course, Maria Stuart in the recording studio as well. Well, thanks very much for coming to chat with me, and thanks very much for the Daughter of the Regiment. It's been absolutely thrilling.
Well, we get
a lot of fun out of it.
Thank you.